No, it's perfect. I think.
We're going to believe it is. What we're going to do tonight is a little bit different than what would normally be done in a church service. And so it's maybe a little bit loud because I'm going to get loud before it gets done. So you may want to adjust that just a little bit. This is called a story sermon. It's not a casual story that we just do. It is a well-researched, carefully planned, carefully thought through, with the goal of giving you the experience, the biblical experience of what the Bible teaches, but in a little bit different format. We started doing these a few years back, and so it'll be a little bit different. You're going to have to use your imagination a little bit, because I have done this with a robe and everything else and all that. So I'm not wearing that, but that's really not important, because this story is about what you're about to hear more than what you see. If you need to, just imagine I bought these glasses at the Walmart in Jerusalem, that kind of a thing. So that can be a part of it. But once we start this tonight, I'm going to be what's called in character, which means I'm going to be sharing as if I'm a different person. And the person we're going to be is one of the 12 disciples, what's at this point very unimportant which one. That you can leave up to imagination and stuff, because I'll talk about some of the other disciples in the story. But this is going to be a story about the last week of Christ here upon earth, and what happened and what took place during that time. Now, to get the proper stage, if you can imagine an Asian Minor, around 80, 60, persecution is starting within the church. And so people are kind of meeting in quiet and private, and there's a risk involved. And one of the disciples of Christ that was there during that week of crucifixion arrives to visit, either at Ephesus or Laodicea or somewhere in there. And as they come, they're asked to talk and to share. And the church has been reading through the book of Isaiah, the scroll of Isaiah, and it comes to the time within that church for the guest to read the passage, and he reads from Isaiah 53. And that sets the stage on what we're about to do and experience. So again, remember, we're going to travel back in time and listen to the words as the disciple of Christ would share them. This evening we're going to be reading from the scroll of Isaiah. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. I was there. I was there when they crucified Jesus. It'd been a long and disturbing time for us. As we drew near to Passover and spent time with the Lord, it seemed like there were moments when he would take us apart and visit with us and talk to us privately. And I remember we had several conversations like that. And it was like he started talking about something different. I mean, we had listened to him share some of these things before, but the closer we got to Jerusalem, the more we became aware that there was something about this particular trip to Jerusalem that was different. And on the way to Jerusalem, he said something that all of us kind of looked at each other and thought, what is he talking about? Because as we walked up from Jericho to Jerusalem, up into the mountains there, Jesus said, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. And then he added, to rise again. And when we looked among ourselves and said, what? This brought back some of the other things that Christ had said at different times, and he had said it. He said, destroy this temple. In 3 days I will raise it up. So as we traveled up that way, we arrived at Bethany, and it was interesting because we knew that Lazarus was very, very sick. And we thought that when Jesus discovered this, he would hurry, because he had a very close relationship with Lazarus, and that he would hurry to Lazarus' side. But the Lord didn't do that. He seemed to be very, very calm about it, very, very casual about it. And we didn't arrive very quickly. And when we finally did get there, I remember Mary and Martha came up to him, and there was this concern, well, where have you been? You know, if he'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. And he had died. I'll never forget that. We were standing outside of Lazarus' tomb, and Jesus was praying. And he said something, I couldn't quite hear it, but it caught my attention, because it was like, I'm doing this for the people around me. Like, I'm fully aware of who you are, kind of a statement, but they're not, and they need to see this. And then of all things, he started weeping. I mean, Jesus was a one strong, sturdy guy, and I'd watched him do different things along the way, and man. But there were moments, I remember a moment when he stood looking at Jerusalem and cried. But he started weeping. And then he told us to move the stone away, and he cried out, Lazarus, come forth. And well, we'd seen him do miracles before, but there before our very eyes, Lazarus stepped out, all wrapped in grave clothes. He was alive. From there, we went to Jerusalem, and I remember the excitement. I mean, we're going there for the week of the Passover, and we were thrilled with it. And Jesus told us to go find this guy and this man, and to he would have a donkey, and to ask for it, and the man would give it, which I thought was kind of interesting. Just, you know, we went to where this man was, and he seemed very willing and free. And I mean, how did the Lord know that? It was beyond us. But we brought the donkey back, and then he sat up on it, and we began to go toward the gate of Jerusalem. And people started gathering when they saw him. That always happened, though. People always gathered when Jesus was around. But this time they were starting to shout and to praise. And some of them were laying down garments, and we got caught up into it. It was really exciting, because now it's just finally they were recognizing who Jesus is. 3 years of ministry, 3 years of working, trying to share that this was indeed the Messiah. Jesus had told us that. We knew, even as Peter said, that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah. And now they seemed to be getting it, and it was thrilling. We threw our coats down, we got into it, we were leading them in Jerusalem. They were recognizing who he was. There were people that saying, the Pharisees were saying, don't say the things you're saying about him, because they were crying out and praising him as being a descendant of David, and as King David was, so would be Jesus. And I thought, this is it, it's finally taking place. They're finally understanding. It was a wonderful moment. It was a moment that just all that had taken place up to now was worth it at that point in time. I remember we settled in that night, and the next day we go to the temple. I thought, what next is going to happen? This is exciting. We're starting to see the pieces come into place. And he arrives at the temple, and let me tell you, it's the temple. I mean, one of the things that happens, we're all used to it. It was something we've seen most of our life. And that was the fact that there would be people coming from all over, coming for the Passover. And if you were traveling, you couldn't possibly bring all the stuff that you needed, the sacrificed animals. And so it was quite common to accept the fact that you were going to go in there and you were going to buy your animal, that you would be involved in the sacrifice. And the truth is, we all knew what went on there. These money changers, they're like the tax collectors. They got their share of it for sure. But what are you going to do? You know, I mean, you don't have a choice. You need to have the offering. God said to do the offering. And so we're quite used to it. We'd walk in there, and there would be the men changing the money so you could go and purchase the animal that you needed for your sacrifice. And didn't really think much about it. And then all of a sudden there was this crash, and we realized that Jesus is overturning tables, and he is driving out these money changers, and it was a chaotic scene that was taking place. And I thought, what's going on? We just had this fantastic day yesterday. He was being recognized as the king. He's coming into Jerusalem, and now he's just, all this is going on. What's he doing? He's going to upset the people in power. He's going to alienate them. They're not going to understand what he's doing here. Why is he doing this? And then I remember Jesus said, this is my house, and it's not a house of merchandise. That was kind of discouraging because I didn't know what was going to come of it at that point. I knew the Romans were watching. I knew that there could be trouble ahead. I remember going out to the Mount of Olives on the next day, and it was kind of interesting. Jesus sat us down there on the Mount of Olives, and he began to talk. And we talked a lot of things before. We'd listen to him, and he'd talk about how our lives should be and what should be done and how we should respond to God. But this day, he's talking about the end of the world. And he's sharing with us things that are just, when we thought about it, this is coming. And interesting enough, as we were walking there, he came to a fig tree, and it was a full-grown fig tree, but it had no fruit on it. And we were kind of looking for it, and we saw it at a distance. Says, man, we'll be able to get something to eat here. And we get up to it, and it doesn't have a thing on it. And then I remember Jesus, we cursed it. And we went on. I didn't think anything about it. Later, when we come back to it, it was all withered and worn. And I thought, wow, you sure don't want to have God's disapproval. Be like that fig tree. Remember the night of the Passover. We have celebrated the Passover all our lives. The memory, the deliverance out of Egypt. Precious that is, that God stood by his people. I remember as we were preparing it, going about it, I noticed that Jesus was doing something. He was getting a bowl of water, and as we watched, he took a towel, and he began to go to each of us disciples. Here's our Lord doing this. He's going to each of us, and he's washing our feet. And I kind of said, oh, I'm not worthy of this. Well, Peter, being Peter's, he voiced it, and he says, no, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. And then I remember Jesus saying, if I don't do this, you're not going to be a part of me. And then, of course, Peter, being Peter, said, well, then wash all of me. And Jesus said, those that are clean do not need that, just washing their feet. And I wondered, well, your feet get dirty, yeah. Trying to figure out what was going on. I remember as we were sitting about preparing to do the Passover dinner together, the Passover supper together. I noticed that as I'm sitting at the end, reclining at the end of the table there, I noticed that Jesus and Judas are talking. There's something going on, some kind of conversation that's taking place. And then I remember Jesus saying to him, what you're going to do quickly. And Judas immediately got up and he left. And I thought, oh, I wonder what that is all about. Well, Judas is our treasurer. He's handled the money all this time. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, he's probably there's something we needed. And so he sent Judas off to get it and to hurry and get it. And so I didn't think much about it. I thought, well, he just wants him to buy something. And we came to the time of the Passover. What's interesting is the bread. During the Passover, we break the bread. And we take it, and one of the pieces that are broken, we wrap in cloth. And then when there's children involved, it's really fun because the children aren't allowed to look, and we take and we hide that piece of bread. And then what happens is the children go out trying to find it, and they look around the house till they can actually find it. And then when it's found, it's brought out and it's unwrapped, and it's part of then the meal together. I remember Jesus taking this bread, and he broke it, and he passed it out to us, and then he said, this is my body. Well, we knew it really wasn't his body. We knew it was the bread. It was symbolic. It was representative of God in our lives and all of that. But he said, this is my body, which is broken for you. And then he took the fruit of the vine, We have it in a cup at Passover that we pass around the room. We drink from it. It represents blood, the lamb's blood. And we all know the story. There at Passover, there in Egypt, the people of Israel are there, and Moses is going before Pharaoh and challenging Pharaoh to let God's people go, and Pharaoh's refusing, and there's been one plague after another. And then there comes that night when God tells us, take the lamb, kill it, take the blood, put it over the doorpost, put it on the side. And if you get in that house, if you stay in that house, you're protected from the judgment that's coming upon Egypt. And that night it came, the death angel came. I've often thought about that during Passover, what that meant. To be in that house, protected by the blood on the door, and to hear screams outside of the death angel as it encountered people who were not prepared. And I was very, very thankful, and would have been very thankful if I had been there for the blood that was on the door. Jesus took that cup, and just as he'd done with the bread, he said, this is my body. Well, we knew it wasn't, or this is my blood, he said. We knew it really wasn't his blood. It was the fruit of the vine. It was symbolic, but he took it, and he told us to drink of it. Afterwards, Jesus shared some things with us. Wonderful things. Beautiful things. He made promises to us as we're sitting there. About a third of the way through, he says, rise, let's go. And we left, and we started walking out toward a garden area. There's a little bit of a walk, and along the way, Jesus continued to teach us, continued to make these promises. And I remember listening, and they were fantastic. They were confusing because he was talking about going away and that he would send comfort to us through his Spirit. And that was encouraging, but we're still trying to figure out, what does he mean? He's not going to be here after all this time? I hope I'll never forget those promises as I listen to them. And we arrived at this garden area, and I remember how tired I was. Oh, all of us were tired. It'd been a busy week, a challenging week, an adrenaline-filled week. We were exhausted at that point, and I remember falling asleep there. And Jesus had asked us to come with him and to come apart and to pray. And we were trying. I tried to pray. Found myself falling asleep and kind of dozing there. I heard Jesus, and he was praying, and I heard him say, not my will, but your will. What's he talking about? Then all of a sudden there was noise and chaos everywhere. The temple guards were coming in, and Judas was with them, and we finally thought, what's he doing with them? And they were there, and they were coming and gathering us up, and they were going to, it looked like, arrest all of us. And one of the things we saw is Judas came up and kissed Jesus, gave him a kiss there, and immediately they knew who he was, and the guards went for Jesus. Interesting enough, Peter, you got to love the guy, you know. He grabs a sword, and he cuts off the ear of one of these men. And I watched as Jesus took it and put it back on his head. I mean, these guys are coming here to take us as prisoners. And he put it back on this man's head, and he was healed. And I remember they came for him. I'll never forget this. They came for Jesus to grab him. And all of a sudden, there was this moment, just a brief moment, when suddenly there was glory everywhere. It was as if we'd walked into the very presence of God, the very holiness of God. And I remember these temple guards fell back in terror at that moment. And then it was gone. Jesus had opened up something. He'd opened up some kind of gateway into eternity, and the glory that was his from heaven above was felt by everyone present. And he said, you've come for me. Leave these alone. And we took off, man. We were getting out of there. There was no purpose in staying there. We saw them taking Jesus off. The trial. What a sham. Jesus was already convicted in their minds. There's no doubt about that. He was there with the Sanhedrin, and I remember we would get bits and pieces of what was going on. And they were challenging him. They were asking him if he was the Messiah, and he told them there was. And I remember being told that one of the Sanhedrin slapped Jesus when he said that. And then they took him to Pilate, who took him to Herod, who brought him back to Pilate. It's like they didn't know what to do with him at that point. I'll never forget the whip, the horrid sound. The whip, it wasn't just leather. They had weaved into that leather on it sharp stones, glass-like stuff. And it was all through the whip. So when they would use it and they would whip someone, the whip would actually sling against their body, and these stones would, these sharp bits of pieces of stone-like things would grab right into the flesh. And so the whip would come around and slap and grab, and then when they pulled it back, it would tear the flesh away. And I remember listening to that sound as that whip would hit his body, and the cries and the moan that took place. I had a cousin whipped once. It took him days to recover from it. And then I remember these guards, these Romans. I remember they took thorns from a plant that was there. We have some horrid thorns. These things are about that long. And they worked on it and made a crown because Jesus had been sharing that he was King of the Jews. That was the accusation that was made against him with Pilate. And so they made a crown of thorns. And they put it on his head. And I remember watching these long thorns hit the scalp and went underneath the skin and pushed down along the skull. And the blood began to pour. They started mocking him. They hit him with their fists, pretending to worship or to honor him as king. You read here just a few weeks back, I'm sure, in your studies of the book of the scroll of Isaiah. But Isaiah tells us a prophecy about our Lord. I gave my back to those who struck me, and my cheeks to those who plucked out the beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. We watched as these soldiers took and grabbed the beard on Jesus' face and ripped it from his face. This whole thing couldn't believe it was happening. Couldn't believe it was happening. Then Pilate did something that caught our attention, all of us. Before the whole crowd, for all the people that were gathered there, he gave an opportunity for the people to choose a prisoner to free. And they, of course, had Jesus standing there, and we thought, oh, this is a given. The crowds love him. Look what happened when they entered into Jerusalem. They were saying he was the Messiah. Look what took place on the hillsides when he taught. The thousands came to see him. And he puts Jesus up there as an opportunity to free Jesus. And he takes a robber and a thief that we all knew was a vicious robber and thief, Barabbas, and he puts him up there. And we thought, this is easy. Jesus is going to get rescued here. And this crowd of people screamed for Barabbas to be freed. These are the same people that put down the branches, that laid down their coats. And Barabbas is freed. I remember the long walk to the place of the skull. Jesus carrying the cross. Until it was impossible to do so. It was too heavy, so heavy. Another man was made to carry it, Simon of Cyrene. I think about that now, what a privilege that must have been. I wish I could have carried it for Jesus. But I was starting to realize something at that moment. I was starting to realize I am not the relief from the pain. Now I understand I was the cause of it. The women on either side were crying and weeping out, weeping as they saw Jesus being taken to the place of the skull where crucifixions are done. And I remember Jesus stopped and looked at them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and your children." And I remembered him talking about the end of the world and how the temple would be destroyed and that the Jewish people would be attacked. And I remembered the fig tree withered. Had we, the chosen people, had we become like that fig tree? Was that us, withered? And then they came to the place of the skull. I don't know if you've ever witnessed the crucifixion. What a lot of people don't realize is when the Roman government crucifies, they don't take and hang someone on the crosses with their clothes on. They strip them naked, completely, totally naked, so that they might have the shame and be exposed to everyone around them. And they took Jesus' clothing, stripped it from his body, and put him on the cross. I remember seeing people sitting down, Pharisees, Roman soldiers, laughing, mocking him. They seemed to enjoy it. When they got ready to crucify Jesus, I remember the sound, that awful sound, the clanging of the hammer against the nail, the moan of pain each time the hammer fell, and the blood beginning to run from the hand. Nails driven in the hands and feet. Now, when the Romans crucify, they often will tie the wrists and tie the feet. And the reason, it's not to hold them on. Well, it's not to make sure that they are there. That's how they're held there. It's to keep the nails from pulling loose, keep their hands from pulling through the nails. And so they tie their hands there to there, but it's the nails that are holding them in place. And there are 3 ways that I know of that people have been crucified. One of the ways is at the place of the skull, they'll have these tall beams, but they're like trees, only they're just like a big pole that stands there. And there are notches on it. And what happens is they'll take a cross beam and put it down and put your hands and your arms out like this, and they nail them to that cross beam, and then they're lifted up by rope to hook into some of these notches, and that cross beam sets inside on these notches, and so that's how they're hung there. That's one of the ways that the Romans crucify. Another way is they take a cross that is made with the cross beam already put on it, have a deep hole, and then they lift that cross beam with the person on it into place, and as they do that, the cross slams down into the hole and jars the person that's on it. A third way they crucified took place when the Romans took Jerusalem. They were crucifying so many people at that time that they couldn't find enough wood. And the Romans took people and nailed them to the walls of Jerusalem, so that the walls of Jerusalem were filled with people that were hanging with their hands stretched out and being crucified. That's because they didn't have enough wood. But on that day, they had enough wood. One of the things that happens in a crucifixion, if you've never seen it, is the struggle that goes on. The way in which a person is hung, they're put upon the cross and they're stretched out. And that's such a position that they have difficulty breathing with it. In order to breathe, they have to pull against the nails at their hand, pull themselves up, pushing with their feet against the nails that are holding them in place. In order to breathe, they have to do this. They have to do that repeatedly. That's how they hang on there. They have to pull up to breathe. And that makes life horrible. People on the cross suffer terrible when they're on a cross. They have difficulty talking on a cross. I know all of you know the many precious words that Jesus said that were said around him. It wasn't easy. Interacting is very, very difficult. Jesus was on the cross for 6 hours. From the 3rd hour, or if in Roman time would be the 9th hour, to the middle of the day. He hung there before everybody. And he did talk to us. He said several things. I remember when they were crucifying, he said, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing." He forgave them. I couldn't have forgave him, but he forgave him. I remember as he's hanging on the cross, there's Mary, his mother, and John, the disciple, was there. And I remember Jesus talking to them and saying, "Mary, behold your son." And to John he said, "Behold, behold your mother." As the time wore on and the hours began to pass, Jesus was crucified with 2 others. They were thieves. Pretty bad thieves. They deserved what they were getting. And first, these thieves were just mocking Jesus with the rest of them, crying out, "If you're really the Messiah, you come off, take us off, and take us too. Get off the cross and bring us with you. If you're really him." I mean, it was terrible. It was so disrespectful. But as the morning wore on, there was something different. One of the thieves began to change. He looked like he was thinking things through very carefully. I mean, the reality was he was about to die. And I'll never forget, as he hung there, he said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Now, who does he think he is? Jesus doesn't deserve to be there. Who does he think he is? He's a thief. He's a sinner. How dare he say that? But I'll never forget what Jesus did. He pulled against the nails, pushed with his feet. "Today, you will be with me in paradise." It was amazing. All about him they were mocking. The Sadducees, the Pharisees. And they were vulgar about it. They were doing vulgar gestures, mocking him. "If you're really the Messiah, come down." I'm laughing. Still there. "If you're really the Messiah, come on down." I think back. Thank God he didn't come down. Thank God he didn't come off the cross. He could have called the angels, I know that. He could have done that. He was in pain and agony, but he didn't come down. He could have called the angels. I think about that. I think about the portal of heaven. What it must have been like for the angels to watch Christ hanging there. I can just see it. Come on, Lord, just tell us. Just come and tell us to come down. We'll take out those Pharisees. We'll take out those Sadducees. Those Romans don't have a chance against us. Just say it, and we'll come down. I remember Pilate washed his hands. It was as if to excuse himself for what he did. Pilate, oh Pilate, there's not enough water in the world to clean your hands. And finally, that incredible sign that Pilate hung above Jesus' head. After all the cruelty, after all the beating, after the crucifixion and hanging of Jesus on that cross, all the accusations, Pilate tells the soldiers to hang a sign that says, King of the Jews. Boy, did that upset the Pharisees. The Sanhedrin, they wanted Pilate to take it down. But he said, what I've written, I've written. It was hot. I remember in the middle of the day. Then something started changing. The skies began to change, began to get darker. Darker. Middle of the day. And I looked up at the cross and something was happening there. Jesus looked like he was interacting. It looked like there was some kind of moment there, and I began to realize that the God of heaven was there. But he wasn't there as Jesus' friend. He wasn't there as Jesus' father. Something was taking place on that cross. The horrible expression on the face of Christ as he hung there, alone on the cross, but not alone. God was there, and God was not his friend. As I understand, as I look back, that was when God was beginning the judgment. You know, we've all read the Psalms, that wondrous psalm that deals with what Jesus was thinking on the cross. It starts out with the words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And it continues and describes the darkness and the light. It was turning dark. And it talks about the roaring of the Messiah, the screaming of the Messiah. But people don't realize, what you folks do not know, but I know I was there, is as Christ hung on the cross, as the skies darkened, as the very presence of the Holy God seemed to be felt there upon that cross, and we could sense it, we could tell it. There on that cross, the anger of God began to pour out upon Christ, and he screamed. And he continued to scream. Something was happening. Something was taking place. There was judgment, and it was all toward Christ. And I look at that now, and I think he was our substitute. He was getting the absolute wrath of God for my sin. He was my lamb. And the horrible weight that rested on him at that moment, all the sin on the cross, Jesus had never sinned. He was amazing. I watched his life. But on the cross, in that moment of time, he became guilty before God of everything. Never done it, but now guilty. Because the judgment of God was being poured upon him. He was guilty of murder on the cross. Guilty of lust. Guilty of swearing. Guilty of abusing children and adults. He was guilty of a filthy mouth. He was guilty of hatred. He became guilty of cruelty. On the cross, he became guilty of rape. On the cross, he became guilty of lying. Who killed Jesus? Not the Romans, not the Jewish leaders. It was me. My sin killed Jesus. Time passed so slowly in the darkness. Darkness, terrible darkness. There was no light of God anywhere that we could see. For 3 hours this went on, this horrid judgment. Somehow, the judgment of what I deserve for all eternity got compressed into that 3 hours. The isolation of being separated from God forever and ever, somehow out of that cross broke into all eternity, and the Son, our Savior, suffered what it was like to not know the Father forever. At the end of the 3 hours, something very powerful happened. When Jesus died, it was about the middle of the afternoon. Over at the temple, preparing for the Passover and sacrifices on the Sabbath, the lambs were starting to be killed. The animals were being brought into the temple. The priests were beginning the process. They'd forgot all about Jesus. A lot of them, they were doing their job. That was to do the preparation for the sacrifice. They were starting to kill the lambs there in the temple, preparing to offer the blood. Just when that was beginning to happen, I will never forget, after these hours of agony, I see Jesus pulling against the nails, pushing with his feet, looking up to heaven, and he spoke. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? I realized something in that moment. All the things that Jesus had taught began to come to my mind. Oh, I had a lot more to understand. I look back now and it's really clear. At that moment, my redemption was completed. Everything that needed to be done to deliver me from sin was now accomplished by him. And remember, in that darkness, Jesus cried out, I thirst! I thirst! And I remember one of the soldiers took what was supposed to be a soldier's drink and put it on a sponge and gave it to Jesus to drink. And I felt kindly to that soldier, even though I'm certain he probably had beaten Jesus earlier. After Jesus took it, he looked about us, weakened, exhausted. And he spoke those wondrous words from his mouth. It is finished. It was done. It was accomplished. Agony and victory at the same time. Jesus had paid it all. He had completed the job of saving me. And in those final moments, Jesus said the words that Jewish men have said so many times at the point of their death throughout all of history. It was a common thing to say. But it reflected who God was and how God is our God. And as the last bit of life began to leave him, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Right at the moment of his death, something happened. We felt it where we were at. It shook all of Jerusalem. It was an earthquake. And down there at the temple where the lambs were being killed and the preparation for the Passover to be done, the preparation for the sacrifices of the Sabbath, down there a great shaking took place. And the veil of the temple, the veil that guards the holy place, the Holy of Holies, the veil that no one can enter in, where God manifests his presence unless they come with the sacrifice and the judgment having taken place in the sacrifice of the animal, of the lamb or the goat. They enter into that holy place. If the priest comes with that, they're allowed to come in because it's symbolic. The judgment has been done. And that veil that protects, that forever prevents man from becoming into the wondrous relationship with God, that saying, I am holy on the other side, that veil, heavy, tears apart. It's as impossible. It couldn't have happened, but it tears apart. And the whole city goes in this earthquake. We felt it out there at the cross. The veil that kept us from being with God was gone because of Christ. The way to God was now open to anyone who would place their trust in Jesus to take them to God. In that darkness, a Roman soldier was next to me, looking at Christ who had just died. And I remember him saying, truly this man was the Son of God. They came and they ran a sword in Jesus' side, but he was already dead. Blood drained from blood on the ground. You see, our salvation, it's not the blood in Jesus' veins. That's not where the power is. It's blood on the ground. What it says is Jesus did it. Jesus paid the price. My salvation is now complete. Now I can come to God through him. This is why Jesus' blood was shed. This is what it means to be redeemed, to be bought from sin. Jesus didn't stay dead. That night, as we sat around the Passover table, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Oh, by the way, you know the rest of it. Jesus didn't stay dead. He arose again like he said he would. I saw that also. But that's another story. I remember Jesus told Brother Nicodemus. Nicodemus told me, he said this. For God so loved the world that he gave his only unique Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but would have everlasting life. Father, I thank you for the opportunity to share this story with my brothers and sisters in Christ. Help us not to forget what it cost that we might walk in heaven someday. We pray in our Savior's name. Amen. You're dismissed.